is the most self-serving photograph. Can people hear me? Wait a moment. Anyway, people can hear me. Most self-serving photograph you're likely to see. This is the, well, in Britain, the television series is called Spooks, but that's a bit of a slur in the United States. So I'm happy that in the United States it's called MI5. Or as I've noticed from the small print, MI5, not 9 to 5. Or there's even smaller print at the bottom, MI5, not 9 to 5. They search for the truth, but their life is a lie. I haven't worked that one out quite yet. So there I am. This is the only authorized photograph, indeed the only photograph ever taken of anybody entering Thames House, the headquarters of MI5. You may wonder why there's that strange expression on my face. It's really going to be a really difficult day. I'm having to decide, what shall I look at today? Should it be more of the 50 volumes of Anthony Blunt's personal file, or should I turn towards the IRA? Actually, I mean, there hasn't been a dull day ever since I've been involved in that. Now, the other thought that explains possibly the strange expression on my face there is that anyone who writes about intelligence, I think particularly anyone who writes about British intelligence, is deeply conscious of the fact that intelligence is the only profession in the history of the world in which a fictional character who never lived is at least 100 times better known than anyone who ever lived. And of course is James Bond. We Brits, and we may look a bit buttoned up, and I haven't even undone the buttons on my jacket, but our secret fantasies have a global appeal that I think very few other nationalities have. I mean, the idea that a couple of years ago, for example, the #1 bestseller in France would be a book called Harry Potter. Even school children in Britain are brought up to have secret fantasies of the kind which our friends in the European Union will never come close to. One of the things that surprised me when I was working on these wonderful, wonderful files that are in their hundreds of thousands and indeed their millions inside Thames House was I actually came across one or two people who did things that even Bond would not have done. Now here's one. Look at that. It's not a very good photograph. It was taken before the Second World War. Anyone who's been to the House of Parliament in London will have seen that bridge. It's Westminster Bridge, but when you were last there, nobody was attempting to fly a plane beneath it. This man did. He was known as the Mad Major for two reasons. One, that he was indeed a bit mad. Secondly, that he actually was a major. He had been a fighter pilot ace during the First World War, and he flew under every bridge in London. I mean, Britain has always esteemed eccentrics, so he wasn't even prosecuted until after the Second World War. But who in the 1930s heard about the exploits of the Mad Major? Yes, the man on the right here. You'll all recognize him. His name was Adolf Hitler, and he caused a lot of trouble before and during the Second World War. Our man, the Mad Major, Christopher Draper, is the man on the left, and there are a couple of rather feeble-looking German fighter aces from the First World War in between the two. So after being invited over to Germany and talking to the Führer for a couple of hours at the Munich air show, as soon as he got back, our man, Christopher Draper, was asked if he would kindly spy for German intelligence, the Abwehr. And he said absolutely fine, stopping only to ask MI5 if it would be in fact absolutely fine. And they said it would be absolutely fine, and that he just needed to do two things. One, only pass on information which they gave to him. And secondly, to provide all the contact details that he was given as to how to make contact with German intelligence. And that actually is the hitherto unknown origins of the double-cross system. I mean, there were lots of advances thereafter, but it was through Christopher Draper that MI5 learnt how existing spies, real spies, not double agents, made contact with German intelligence. That was how, and I won't go into the details which are known to many people here, we discovered about Snow, and the rest is the most successful deception in the entire history of warfare. And I don't think that that's an exaggeration. But, you don't just suddenly learn deception overnight. There we are. This is the beginning of the First World War. At the beginning of the First World War, MI5 only had 17 staff members, and that was including the caretaker. So there was a very rapid expansion, which brought our numbers up in London to over 850 by the end of the war, and there were lots of other people at the ports. And this is the first man who were recruited. He's only 20. One of the things in both world wars, I think, which distinguishes British intelligence, is the willingness to recruit very bright, but also very young, talented people. This man's name is William Hinchley Cook. He was recruited in August 1914. He was only 20 at the time. He had been educated in Germany. His father was British and his mother was German. And he was taken on. Now, you probably can't see from where you are, but the picture is in the book. The problem was that he spoke with a strong German accent. Now, in August 1914, even if you had a dachshund in London, you were tended to be suspected, and Thomas Bockhart will be able to provide further details on that. So the only way that he could be allowed into MI5 headquarters, which was then in the War Office, was having a little sentence at the bottom, which you can barely see, which says, "He is an Englishman," and signed by the head of MI5. But that was only one of his personae. I mean, at the age of 20, I'm not clear that anybody has had a more successful career in deception than this man. There we are. There he is as a German officer. There wasn't a single German POW during the First World War who suspected that he was not, in fact, himself a German POW. And of course, when he spoke English, it was with a German accent. But also, there were a limited number of enemy nationals, as they were called, who were allowed to carry on living in London during the First World War. And the Metropolitan Police gave him a pass to carry on living in London, and this one is it. It, however, describes him as Wilhelm Eduard. The British police couldn't spell Eduard, so it's Edward Koch. And again, there wasn't a single enemy national, so-called, who suspected him. So by the age of 21, this man had deceived more people than any other 21-year-old, I think, in British history. We British are very good at deceiving people. Oh yes, this is our founder, Vernon Kell. Vernon Kell lasted far too long. I mean, it's rather odd, isn't it, that the two people who stayed in their jobs longest in the history of the 20th century in an official position in both the United States and Britain were head of internal security, J. Edgar Hoover, or as we call him in Britain, Sir J. Edgar Hoover, because unknown to most people in the United States, we did award him an honorary knighthood because, as you know, he could be rather irritable. And in 1951, the only way of calming him down was to make him Sir Edgar Hoover. We've never done that since, because frankly no subsequent director of the FBI has been nearly as irritable. But look at him. I mean, he was the best linguist ever to become head of any British intelligence agency, so far as I know, any British government department. He had translator's qualifications in Chinese, and it was not easy getting to China in 1909. He had translator's qualifications in Russia, and he spoke all the other sort of more straightforward languages that some, if not all of us, speak. Yeah, can't talk about that. That's a, no, I haven't got time. Oh yes, I will only talk about this because Peter a moment ago talked about Stella Remington. Well, gender historians in Britain lead seriously depressive and uninteresting lives. So they have not noticed that the cutting edge in gender history is actually MI5. Because, you know, Britain's not noted as a place where the glass ceiling was cracked and then broken at any point in the 20th century. But actually it began in MI5. Stella Remington, when she became Director General of MI5 in 1992, was the first female head of any major intelligence agency anywhere in the world. And what has not been noticed is it began in the First World War. Now, this is a drawing made during the First World War, and I'll explain in a moment. What happened during the First World War is that the men in MI5 had this slightly sexist but nonetheless very interesting idea: why don't we have the cleverest secretaries in world history? And nobody had asked that question before. So even though MI5 didn't have direct links so far as male